The clock struck midnight, and at first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The guests were still chatting, laughing, and enjoying themselves, completely unaware of what was about to happen. But then, a faint hum began to rise from beneath the deck. It was soft at first, almost blending in with the distant sounds of crickets chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. No one paid much attention to it, until the movement started. At first, the rotation was so subtle that some guests thought they were imagining it. Did the ground just shift? One woman asked, gripping the railing tightly as she looked around nervously. Another guest laughed it off, saying, "Maybe you've had too much wine." But soon, the movement became impossible to ignore. The deck began to turn slowly, shifting everyone's position ever so slightly. Glasses tilted on flat surfaces, chairs creaked against the wooden planks, and the string lights swayed above their heads like a gentle warning. Karen heard the commotion from inside the house and froze for a moment, her heart sinking. She'd completely forgotten about the automatic rotation schedule. Rushing toward the sliding glass door, she stepped outside just in time to see the confusion turning into panic. Some guests clung to the railing, wide-eyed, and unsure whether they should laugh or scream. Others scrambled to grab their belongings, only to realize there was nowhere safe to put them down since the entire deck was now in motion. Greg, the same man who had joked earlier about the deck giving them a ride, was standing near the center, arms spread wide, as if trying to keep his balance. "Okay, this is officially wild," he said, though his forced laugh betrayed his unease. A few people joined in with nervous giggles, attempting to make light of the situation. But not everyone was amused. One woman gasped loudly, clutching her chest as she stared at the edge of the deck. "What happens if someone falls off?" she blurted out, her voice trembling. Her words sent a ripple of fear through the group, silencing the laughter almost instantly. Karen felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She should have warned them. She should have made sure everyone knew exactly how the deck worked and when it would start moving. Instead, she had let them linger outside without a second thought. Now, here they were, caught in the middle of something that felt more like a carnival ride than a relaxing evening under the stars. As the deck picked up speed, the guests grew increasingly agitated. The smooth, slow rotation Karen had once found mesmerizing now felt jarring and unpredictable. Furniture slid across the planks, forcing people to step aside quickly to avoid tripping. Someone's phone slipped out of their hand, skittering toward the edge before stopping just short of falling off. Every little movement felt exaggerated, every sound amplified by the mounting tension. One man, clearly frustrated, shouted, "How do we stop this thing?" His question hung in the air as everyone turned to Karen, waiting for an answer. She hesitated, unsure of what to say. She hadn't thought about how to manually override the system. It wasn't something she'd ever needed to do before. Panic bubbled up inside her as she realized she might not be able to fix this quickly. The situation worsened when another guest tried to jump off the deck mid-rotation. Thinking he could simply step onto the grass below, he misjudged the distance and stumbled, landing awkwardly on his knees. He let out a sharp cry of pain, drawing horrified looks from the others. Someone immediately called 911, their voice shaking as they explained the bizarre predicament. By now, the mood had shifted entirely from carefree enjoyment to sheer chaos. People huddled together, holding onto whatever they could find for stability, while others pleaded with Karen to do something. Anything to stop the spinning. Karen stood frozen for a moment longer, her mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. Her dream home, her prized deck, her perfect party, all of it was spiraling out of control in ways she never could have imagined. As the evening wore on, the guests settled into a comfortable rhythm on the rotating deck. The initial excitement of seeing the unique feature had faded slightly, replaced by casual conversations and laughter. Wine glasses clinked together as people toasted to the beautiful night, and plates of snacks were passed around. Some leaned against the railing, gazing out at the twinkling lights in the valley below, while others sat in chairs, chatting about everything from work to weekend plans. It was the kind of gathering Karen had envisioned, warm, lively, and just a little bit envy-inducing. But amidst all the chatter and cheer, no one seemed to notice the small warning sign near the railing. Even if they had glanced at it, the words *caution. Deck rotates automatically at midnight. Please vacate before might have gone unnoticed or dismissed as unimportant. After all, who reads signs during a party? Most people were too busy enjoying themselves to pay attention to such details, and Karen, for her part, didn't bring it up again. She figured there was plenty of time before midnight, and besides, she didn't want to ruin the mood by making everyone think about leaving. Karen moved between the kitchen and the deck, refilling drinks and checking in with her guests. Every now and then, she'd catch snippets of their conversations, someone talking about their recent vacation, another sharing a funny story about their pet. Everyone seemed genuinely happy, and Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. Her house, her deck, her party. It was all coming together perfectly. For once, she felt like she was truly living the life she'd always dreamed of. Back on the deck, Greg, the man who had joked about the deck's rotation earlier, was still curious. He wandered over to the railing and peered down at the ground below, trying to imagine how the mechanism worked. "I bet this thing could give you quite the ride," he said with a laugh, turning to the group. A few people chuckled nervously, glancing at the railing as if expecting it to start moving any second. But nothing happened. The deck remained perfectly still, blending seamlessly into the peaceful night. Meanwhile, Karen began to relax. She sipped her wine and chatted with a couple of guests inside, feeling confident that everything was under control. Midnight felt so far away, almost like an abstract concept. What could possibly go wrong? The thought barely crossed her mind as she laughed at someone's joke or complimented another guest on their outfit. She didn't realize how quickly time can slip away when you're distracted by good company and flowing conversation. The truth was, Karen hadn't considered the possibility that her guests might lose track of time too. Out on the deck, people were so engrossed in their conversations and the stunning view that hours seemed to melt away without anyone noticing. No one checked their watches or phones, and the idea of leaving before midnight never came up. The soft glow of string lights strung around the deck created a cozy atmosphere, making it easy to forget about the world beyond the railing. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Karen grew more comfortable, even letting herself enjoy the moment instead of worrying about logistics. She assumed someone would eventually suggest heading back inside, or maybe she'd casually mention it herself when the time felt right. But deep down, she knew she should have been clearer about the deck's automatic rotation schedule. Instead, she let the evening unfold naturally, trusting that nothing unusual would happen. Little did Karen, or any of her guests, realize that the quiet hum of the motor system beneath their feet was about to change everything. In the months that followed the infamous rotating deck incident, Karen's life began to settle into a new rhythm. The story of the disastrous party had become something of a local legend, retold at community gatherings with varying degrees of accuracy. Some versions painted Karen as a clueless host who didn't know her own house. Others turned it into a slapstick comedy, complete with exaggerated sound effects and dramatic reenactments. While Karen initially cringed every time she heard someone mention it, she eventually learned to laugh along, mostly because she realized how ridiculous the whole thing truly was. The transformation of her deck played a big role in helping her move forward. With the rotating mechanism gone, the space felt calmer and more inviting. Gone were the sleek, futuristic vibes that had once screamed, "Look at me." Instead, Karen filled the area with soft cushions, string lights, and potted plants, creating a cozy retreat where she could unwind after a long day. She even added a small fire pit in one corner, perfect for roasting marshmallows or sipping hot cocoa on chilly evenings. It wasn't flashy, but it was hers. And for the first time, Karen found herself enjoying the deck without worrying about what others thought. Her approach to hosting changed too. No longer obsessed with impressing people, Karen started inviting smaller groups of friends and neighbors over for low-key gatherings. These events weren't about showing off her home. They were about connecting with others in meaningful ways. Guests brought dishes to share, kids ran around playing tag in the yard, and conversations flowed naturally without any pressure to entertain. Slowly but surely, Karen rebuilt her relationships with the community, proving that she wasn't just the woman with the spinning deck fiasco, but someone genuinely interested in fostering friendships. One evening, during one of these casual get-togethers, Greg, the man who had joked about the deck giving them a ride, showed up unexpectedly. Karen froze for a moment when she saw him walking up her driveway, unsure if he was there to tease her again or simply be polite. But to her surprise, he greeted her warmly, holding out a plate of homemade brownies. "Peace offering," he said with a grin. "Figured I owed you since my joke probably didn't help matters that night." Karen laughed, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She thanked him and invited him to join the group gathered around the fire pit. As they sat together under the stars, Greg brought up the infamous party, not to make fun of her, but to reflect on how crazy it all had been. "Honestly, I think we'll all remember that night forever," he admitted. "But not because of the spinning deck. It's because it brought us together in this weird, unforgettable way." His words struck a chord with Karen. For so long, she'd seen the incident as a failure, a moment of humiliation she wished she could erase. But hearing Greg talk about it made her realize that maybe it wasn't all bad. Yes, it had been chaotic and embarrassing, but it had also sparked countless conversations, inside jokes, and even a strange sense of camaraderie among those involved. In its own twisted way, the disaster had humanized her, making her less of an enigma and more of a neighbor. As the weeks turned into months, Karen noticed another shift within herself. She no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone. Owning a unique home didn't mean she had to live up to some unspoken standard of perfection. It meant embracing what made her happy. And while the rotating deck had been impressive, it hadn't brought her joy. What did bring her joy was sitting outside on a quiet evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Looking back, Karen couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. That night had taught her lessons she never would have learned otherwise: humility, patience, and the importance of thinking before acting. More than anything, it reminded her that life is unpredictable. And sometimes, the best stories come from moments that go completely awry. Years later, when Karen hosted her annual summer barbecue, she stood on her now stationary deck, looking out at the crowd of laughing faces. Someone inevitably brought up the infamous rotating deck incident, and instead of cringing, Karen raised her glass and said with a wink, "Here's to unexpected adventures, and to never taking ourselves too seriously." The laughter that followed was genuine, warm, and full of shared memories. And for Karen, that was worth far more than any fancy feature money could buy. Karen had always been the kind of person who loved standing out. She wasn't flashy or loud, but she had a quiet confidence that came from knowing she owned something most people didn't. That something was her house, a modern, slightly unusual home perched on the edge of a hill. It wasn't just any house. It was designed with quirks and features you'd only see in magazines or fancy TV shows. And among all those features, one stood out more than anything else: the rotating deck. The deck sat on the second floor, overlooking the valley below. From there, you could see miles of trees swaying in the breeze during the day and endless stars twinkling at night. But what made it truly special was its ability to move. Every night at exactly midnight, the deck would begin to rotate slowly, making a full 360-degree turn over the course of an hour. The idea behind it was simple yet brilliant. No matter where you were sitting, you'd eventually get the best view possible. Whether it was the golden glow of a sunset or the silver shimmer of moonlight reflecting off distant lakes, the deck ensured everyone got their moment of beauty. Karen hadn't picked this house because she needed such luxuries. She'd bought it because it felt like a dream come true. Growing up, she'd spent years working hard, saving every penny she could, and sacrificing little pleasures so she could afford something extraordinary someday. This house was her reward. However, as much as she adored the place, there was one problem. Karen herself rarely used the deck. You see, Karen had a secret she didn't share with many people. She was terrified of heights. Standing on the deck made her stomach churn and her knees weak. So while she loved showing it off to others, she usually stayed safely inside, sipping tea and imagining how impressed her guests must be. Despite her fear, the deck became Karen's favorite topic of conversation whenever she hosted gatherings. She casually mentioned it, watching as people's eyes widened with curiosity. "A rotating deck? Are you serious?" They'd ask, and Karen would nod proudly, acting as if owning such a thing was completely normal. Truthfully, though, she never let anyone stay out there for too long. Deep down, she worried about something going wrong. What if someone leaned too far over the railing? Or worse, what if the mechanism malfunctioned while they were outside? These thoughts kept her cautious, even as she boasted about her unique home. Still, Karen couldn't deny the thrill she got from seeing people marvel at her property. Her neighbors often joked that her house looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie, and Karen took it as a compliment. She liked being different. She liked having stories to tell. Little did she know, however, that one of those stories was about to take a very unexpected turn. All it would take was a single decision, one impulsive choice, to turn her prized possession into the centerpiece of a night none of them would ever forget. The tension on the deck reached a fever pitch as the rotation continued, growing faster and more unpredictable. The soft hum of the motor beneath their feet had turned into a low groan, almost as if the mechanism itself was protesting the chaos unfolding above it. Karen's heart pounded in her chest as she watched her guests struggle to maintain their balance. Some clung desperately to the railing, their knuckles white, while others huddled together in small groups, trying to steady themselves against the shifting floor. One woman screamed loudly when her wine glass tipped over, spilling its contents onto her shoes. "This is insane," she shouted, her voice cracking with fear. Another guest, visibly pale, muttered under her breath about how this was going to end badly. Even Greg, who had initially joked about the deck giving them a ride, looked shaken. His arms were stretched out like he was walking a tightrope, and his earlier bravado had vanished completely. Meanwhile, the man who had tried, and failed, to jump off the deck sat slumped on the grass below, clutching his scraped knee. Blood seeped through his fingers, but he seemed too stunned to move. Several guests leaned over the railing, shouting down to him to make sure he was okay. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" they called, their voices tinged with panic. He nodded weakly, unable to speak, and someone else quickly dialed 911 again, updating the operator about the injury. Karen felt utterly paralyzed. She wanted to take charge, to reassure everyone that everything would be fine. But the truth was, she didn't know how to stop the deck. Her mind raced through possibilities. Could she shut off the power from inside? Was there an emergency switch somewhere she'd never noticed before? But every idea came with uncertainty. What if turning off the power caused the deck to lock mid-rotation, trapping everyone in awkward, dangerous positions? Or worse, what if it malfunctioned entirely and sent them spinning even faster? As the minutes dragged on, the atmosphere grew increasingly frantic. One guest, desperate for answers, grabbed Karen by the arm. "Can you please do something?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Karen pulled away gently, muttering, "I'm trying." But her attempts at reassurance fell flat. No one believed her anymore, not when they were stuck on a moving platform with no clear way out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the faint sound of sirens pierced the night air. Emergency responders arrived swiftly, their red and blue lights flashing brightly against the dark sky. They approached cautiously, assessing the situation from below before deciding how best to intervene. One firefighter used a megaphone to call out instructions to the frightened group above. "Stay calm and hold on to the railing," he said firmly. "We're going to get you down safely." For the next several minutes, the scene unfolded like something out of an action movie. Firefighters set up ladders and worked methodically to guide each guest off the still-moving deck. Those who were closest to the edge climbed down first, trembling with relief as their feet touched solid ground. Others waited anxiously, holding tightly to whatever they could find until it was their turn. Karen stayed near the back of the group, feeling both responsible and helpless as she watched her friends and neighbors descend one by one. When the last person finally stepped off the deck, the crowd erupted into a mix of laughter and tears. Some hugged each other tightly, grateful to be safe, while others vented their frustration toward Karen. "You should have told us this thing moves," one guest snapped, gesturing wildly at the now empty platform. Another added, "What kind of host forgets to mention something like that?" Karen opened her mouth to apologize, but no words came out. She knew they were right. She had been careless, prioritizing impressing them over ensuring their safety. As paramedics tended to the injured man's knee and firefighters inspected the deck's mechanism, Karen stood silently, overwhelmed by guilt and embarrassment. Her dream home, once a source of pride, now felt like a ticking time bomb. By the time the authorities declared the area secure and packed up their equipment, the mood had shifted dramatically. The carefree evening Karen had envisioned was long gone, replaced by lingering unease and simmering resentment. Guests began leaving without saying goodbye, their faces etched with exhaustion and disbelief. Karen watched them go, realizing that tonight's events would leave a mark, not just on her reputation, but on her conscience as well. It was a crisp Friday evening, and Karen found herself in the kind of mood where everything seemed possible. She'd spent the day tidying up her house, rearranging furniture, and adding fresh flowers to every room. The place looked perfect, almost too perfect to keep to herself. That's when the idea struck her, why not invite some people over? It didn't have to be anything formal, just a casual get-together to show off her beautiful home. After all, it had been weeks since she'd last hosted anything, and Karen missed the buzz of having guests admire her space. She sent out a quick group text to a handful of neighbors and acquaintances she barely knew but desperately wanted to impress. "Spontaneous gathering at my place tonight." The message read, "Come by for drinks and good company." Within minutes, replies poured in. Everyone said yes. Karen grinned as she put her phone down. This was going to be fun. She could already picture the scene. Laughter filling the air, glasses clinking together, and everyone marveling at how unique her house was. As the first guests arrived, Karen greeted them warmly, offering drinks and snacks while subtly steering the conversation toward her favorite topic, her home. "Have you seen the view from upstairs?" she asked, leading the small group toward the staircase. They followed eagerly, intrigued by her enthusiasm. When they reached the second floor, Karen paused dramatically before opening the sliding glass door that led to the deck. "And this," she announced with a flourish, "is my rotating deck." The reaction was exactly what Karen had hoped for. Gasps of surprise filled the air as the guests stepped outside, their eyes widening at the breathtaking vista before them. The valley stretched endlessly, dotted with twinkling lights from nearby houses. Someone whistled in appreciation, while another guest snapped photos on their phone. Karen soaked it all in, feeling a swell of pride. For once, she felt like the center of attention, and she loved it. One of the guests, a man named Greg, chuckled and said, "A rotating deck? You're kidding, right? Does it actually move?" Karen smirked, enjoying the moment. "Why don't we find out?" she teased, though deep down, she had no intention of activating the mechanism manually. Instead, she let the mystery linger, watching as her guests wandered around, testing the sturdiness of the railing and commenting on how smooth the wooden planks felt underfoot. Karen couldn't help but notice how relaxed everyone seemed. The night was cool but not cold, and the soft hum of crickets in the distance added to the ambience. Conversations flowed easily, with laughter echoing across the deck. Feeling satisfied, Karen excused herself to grab more wine from the kitchen, leaving her guests to enjoy the view. As she walked away, she glanced at the small warning sign near the railing. Asterisk caution. Deck rotates automatically at midnight. Please vacate before then. Asterisk, but Karen brushed it off. Midnight was hours away, and surely everyone would be back inside long before then. What harm could it possibly do? Little did Karen know, her decision to ignore that tiny detail would soon spiral into something far beyond her control. As the emergency responders packed up their gear and drove away, the once bustling deck was left eerily silent. The hum of the motor had stopped, leaving behind only the faint rustle of leaves in the cool night breeze. Karen stood alone on the grass, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if trying to hold everything together. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly defeated. What had started as a fun evening had spiraled into a nightmare she couldn't have imagined in her wildest dreams or worst fears. The injured man, whose knee had been bandaged by paramedics, limped toward his car with the help of a friend. Before getting in, he turned to Karen and said flatly, "Next time, maybe warn people before inviting them onto a death trap." His words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Karen opened her mouth to apologize again, but he simply shook his head and got into the car without another word. As the engine roared to life and the headlights illuminated the driveway, Karen watched him drive away, feeling smaller with each passing second. Other guests weren't as direct, but their body language spoke volumes. Some avoided eye contact altogether, while others exchanged knowing glances that made Karen's stomach churn. A few muttered under their breath as they gathered their belongings. Things like, "Who does something like this?" or "I can't believe she didn't say anything." Each comment hit her like a punch to the gut. She wanted to explain, to defend herself, but what could she possibly say? There was no excuse for forgetting such an important detail about her own home. By the time the last car pulled out of her driveway, Karen was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. Her hands trembled as she closed the front door behind her, leaning against it for support. The house, which had seemed so warm and inviting earlier, now felt cold and hollow. Every corner reminded her of the chaos that had unfolded. The spilled wine stains on the deck, the overturned chairs, the string lights swaying slightly even though the motor had stopped. It was as if the house itself bore witness to her mistake. Over the next few days, word spread quickly through the neighborhood. People who hadn't even attended the party heard about the rotating deck disaster, as it came to be known. Some recounted the story with exaggerated details, claiming the deck spun uncontrollably at breakneck speeds, or that someone almost fell off entirely. Others joked about it openly, calling Karen's house the amusement park, or asking if she planned to install roller coasters next. While some of the teasing was lighthearted, much of it carried an undertone of judgment that Karen found hard to ignore. At first, Karen tried to laugh it off. When neighbors asked about the incident, she forced a smile and said things like, "Well, I guess my deck is officially famous," or "Lesson learned, always check the fine print." But deep down, she was mortified. She avoided going outside during the day, fearing curious stares from passersby. At night, she lay awake replaying the events in her mind, wondering how she could have prevented the whole fiasco. The guilt gnawed at her relentlessly. Still, there were moments when Karen surprised herself by finding humor in the absurdity of it all. One morning, while sipping coffee in her kitchen, she caught sight of the deck through the window and chuckled softly. "Only me," she muttered to herself, shaking her head. It wasn't exactly pride she felt. It was more like resignation mixed with a touch of irony. Who else but her would end up hosting a party where the highlight was nearly being flung off a moving platform? Despite the embarrassment, Karen knew she couldn't let one bad night define her or her home. After consulting with a contractor, she decided to disable the rotating mechanism permanently. The motor was dismantled, and the deck was reinforced to ensure it remained stationary. In its place, she added cozy outdoor furniture and potted plants, transforming the space into a serene spot for quiet evenings. It wasn't as flashy as before, but it felt safer. And sometimes, Karen realized, simplicity was better than spectacle. Though the incident damaged her reputation temporarily, it also taught her valuable lessons about humility and responsibility. Hosting wasn't about impressing people, it was about making them feel comfortable and cared for. And owning a unique home wasn't about showing off. It was about appreciating the little joys it brought into her life. As weeks passed, Karen began to rebuild trust with her neighbors, inviting them over for smaller, more intimate gatherings. Slowly but surely, laughter returned to her house, replacing the lingering tension of that unforgettable night.